Now let's talk about how Sagittarius handles each area of life. And actually this next bit of information is for probably more appropriately Sagittarius rising individuals. But it also can apply to a person who is a Sagittarian. Some will work and some will not. And we'll just go through the houses and the different meanings of the houses and the signs of the zodiac that are on these houses for us to talk about how they handle the different areas. We've already talked quite a bit about what a person who has Sagittarius or Sagittarius rising might look like. Generally speaking, it's a wiry kind of look, and there's a real need, and there's probably really it's important for them to exercise a lot because the circulation in the hips and the thighs really need to stay fairly mobile. In fact, if there is ever a problem with hips with Sagittarius or Sagittarius rising, I know Louise Hay talks about it in her book on healing. She says that this is one of the indicators that the person is having the inability to move forward, to step forward. And so, especially with Sagittarius, who's always moving forward, when they have a little bit of a break in that, then there may be some body problems that come up with that. If you move over to the second house of the horoscope, the second house of the horoscope is always associated with money, cash flow, more personal accounts rather than group accounts. It's your skills, your talents, and most importantly, the values. And we can place the sign of Capricorn here. And, Sagittarius, especially Sagittarius rising, may not always be, shall we say, the loosest with their money. They may be, very positive and very abundant, but in terms of how they really spend it or really how they view the immediate ability to deal with it, it may be somewhat limited. Capricorn feels somewhat limited. They may also be very good at managing or organizing people too. This may be a skill or a talent they hold, especially since Capricorn rules management and organization and also real estate. They may also be very good at figuring out the procedure to follow to get something done. In other words, this is point 1, this is point 2, this is point 3, this is point 4. This is something that this particular rising sign, in other words, do things in a very orderly way. They may also be late bloomers in terms of their skills, gifts, and talents, because the sign of Capricorn is always associated with late blooming skills and talents after about 40, 45 years of age. So if you're a Sagittarius or a Sagittarius rising and you're about 35 and you feel like your life's going nowhere, well, you might have to wait till you're about 45 or 50, and then all of a sudden you just take off like crazy. Now, the third house is always associated with the way one communicates, and it shows your brothers, your sisters, your relatives, not mothers or fathers, but relatives. It shows how you process thought. And the sign of Aquarius goes to this position, which is kind of interesting since we talked about brothers and sisters just a bit ago. We were talking about how Artemis and Apollo were they were brother and sister and they were pretty close. Here we see Aquarius on the third house of brothers and sisters. Aquarius is the sign of friends. So it would suggest brothers and sisters would be your friends. But there is also another side to Aquarius on the third house. Aquarius has a lot to do with separation, and it may suggest as close as you have been to relatives or brothers and sisters that at some point, because of unusual circumstances that were really not very controllable, that quite suddenly brothers and sisters were separated. And as close as they've been, they were separated. They were severed from each other at some level. It would suggest that the way you think, the way you process thought would be you gather lots of information and then you glump it into groups, and basically one of the things you do when you communicate is you basically give people information because Aquarius is the sign of information. You may not talk about intimate details about your personal life because Aquarius is not exactly the most open as far as emotions, but it is one where you say, oh, I heard about this, and it's very charming conversation, very charismatic conversation. But to get into anything very in-depth, it might be a little hard because it would be difficult with Aquarius on the third. It would say you would have a wonderful facility for computers, a wonderful facility for working with electronic media or electronic equipment. Might suggest that you would do very well working or teaching, because this can be a teaching house with groups, special projects, where you might be good at organizing like multi-level franchises or, big projects where you get paid and you get a commission on it and you move to something else. Now, if we move to the fourth house, now this is kind of interesting because the fourth house of the horoscope is most traditionally associated with the mother or the parent that you would consider was your nurturing parent. Now, There's always an argument. Sometimes people say this is the house of the father, and basically we'll just look at it as the one that you would suggest was your more nurturing parent. Now we can put the sign of Pisces here. Fourth house also shows all the family root that you come from. Now, Pisces is kind of an interesting turn of events here because Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, and it might suggest, it's not always the case, but it might suggest that since Pisces is associated with sorrow, that sometimes there was sadness and sorrow in the early home life, that there was maybe a parent who, on the positive side, was an artist or a musician because Pisces is associated with music and arts. It might suggest, quite honestly, that there was alcoholism or denial type of issues in the family because Pisces is also sort of associated with alcoholism and drugs. On the other side of that, it might suggest that you had a very spiritual parent, a parent who really taught you about spirit and how important it was to connect with God, because each sign of the zodiac has its positive and its negative sides. It might suggest that the root of the family that you come from is extremely creative because Pisces is what I call the toxic waste management sign of the zodiac, and it has the ability to take old, gunky, negative things and turn it into wonderful, positive things. And it would suggest that there's been a tremendous amount of healing work that you have done on your own from your family or for your family in your life. It would also suggest that you may have a very strong, what we call music root in the family, that there's a real lyrical family, a family that has good voices, has good ear for music, who plays music, who composes lyrics, because Pisces is associated with all of those things. And it's also the sign that's associated with painting and also hands-on healing. Even some nurses are being trained to do the laying on of hands now. It's been something that's been around for about 20 years where they actually work with energy in the hands, and that might be something that's just natural if you have Sagittarius rising. Now, if we move to the fifth house is always the house of romantic partners. Not spouses that you make a legal commitment to, but romantic partners. Children, not only children of the body, but children of the mind. In other words, your creations. And this is it's exciting because the first sign of the zodiac, Aries, which is very aggressive, very assertive, very let's go have fun. It would suggest that there's tremendous amount of passion when you're involved with somebody that you're in love with, that this is a real romantic type of personality, that part of what you like doing as a Sagittarius or Sagittarius rising is the chase or the hunt, because Aries is associated with hunters. And, it's kind of like the cat and the mouse. I think, if the cat is chasing the mouse and the mouse is still running around, it's exciting. But if the cat catches the mouse or the mouse dies, then it doesn't want it. And that's kind of how I think Sag risings are or Sages are with lovers, is it's the chase that's the most exciting part. Once they catch them, they don't always know what to do with them, but it's the process. It would suggest that you put a lot of passion, a lot of energy, a lot of vitality into your creativity and into having fun. It would suggest that if you were to have any children, they're going to be real independent and real headstrong and real bright. And they're not really going to be the kinds of children you can tell what to do because they're all going to have minds of their own, because Aries is definitely a sign that has a mind of its own. You might have to teach them to finish what they begin. You might have to teach them to work on organizing their vision. And I think this is a nice blend. Sagittarius with Aries are both fire signs. Is teaching the Aries, the Sag can teach them how to organize themselves. Aries on the fifth house, too, this is another comment. Since this is really where a lot of the energy in the horoscope is, and since this is also the house that has to do with workshops and seminars and meeting planning, would suggest that as a Sagittarius, you might have a gift to put groups of people together or meetings together. They teach people a lot, they learn a lot, and they have a lot of fun. It may be something that's just innate in your personality, and it might suggest that whatever creativity you do have, writing or dancing or whatever, it is unique, it is innovative, it's always ahead of its time. If it's something that isn't ahead of its time or out in the forefront, you're not going to be interested in it because this is a very pioneering part of the chart. Now, if we go to the sixth house is basically the house of service and health, one of the houses that rules health. And so we want to see what sign is on there to see what part of the body that rules, which would say that this is the part of the body that would be particularly sensitive if your work isn't going right. And we have the sign of Taurus here, which is ruled by Venus, which is the throat chakra, which would suggest another part of the body that needs to be watched is the thyroid, because the thyroid has a lot to do with regulating weight, of course, but it is involved with also expression. The throat chakra is involved with expression. It would suggest, since you have the sign of Taurus here, that your work would involve speaking, probably. And it would suggest, since this is also the house that shows the work environment, the employees with whom you work, that you would probably find yourself in work environments where people are pretty stable, because Taurus is a pretty stable sign, and where you might be working with people's monies and finances or resources, because that's the sign of Taurus and it's on the house of work. It might suggest too that that when you work, you can only do like one thing at a time, because Taurus is pretty fixed. And okay, I'm going to get this project done, I'm going to complete it, and then I'm going to move to the next thing. And that might be the most effective way that you can work. It might suggest that you do serve people. You're pretty good about doing it. That if you're going to serve them, though, you want to be given enough time to do the job right, because Taurus likes enough time to do the job right. And that, quite frankly, since Taurus has a lot to do with money and finances, you want to get paid for your work. You're not going to be taking less money than you deserve for the quality work that you're putting out. We'll move to the 7th house. The 7th house always shows the more intimate relationships, marriage, legal partnerships, more committed long-term relationships. And we have the sign of Gemini here, which Gemini is a dual sign. In other words, it might suggest there might be 2 marriages in the life, or 2 committed marriages, or 2 committed relationships in the life. It might suggest that the kinds of partners you're particularly attracted to, that you want to commit to over a long period of time, are tricksterish. You never know who's coming home. One day this person comes home, the next day this type of person comes home. They may have 2 or 3 personalities. It might suggest that you attract to you partners that maybe are easily distracted. You need to have a bright, intelligent partner who talks and communicates and really uses their mind and their intellect, because Gemini is very associated with that. It might suggest here that you're attracted to people who have a hard time growing up, which is kind of interesting, because that's one of the challenges of Sagittarius themselves. It might suggest too, though, that your partner simply works in the communication industry, since Gemini is communications and speaking and talking. And it might suggest that you could have a business partnership and a personal partnership going at the same time with one person, the dual purpose of the sign. If we go to the 8th house is also a house of money, but it's more the house of resources that we gain by working with other people's resources. In other words, as a counselor, or as a financial planner, or as a person who does fundraising. It would suggest that actually, if we look at the axis of money here in the chart, that a Sagittarius person would do better financially working with other people's resources, thereby gaining their own, rather than working on their own. It suggests that they would be more powerful in a group of people. Since the sign of Cancer is here, and this is also the house of investments, and Cancer rules restaurants and the bar and liquor business and the antique business and the housing industry, the family planning industry, the family therapy industry, any industry that has to do with family products or planning, that these are all industries that you could do very well in, number one. And number two, it would suggest that you might have an ability to attract to you partners that do very well financially, because Cancer is a very financially stable and security-oriented kind of sign. It would also suggest that when you want to be most intimate, when you want to reveal your most deep secrets, that you have to feel, since Cancer deals with the emotions, deeply secure emotionally with that person in order to reveal all of that. It might suggest that your savings and your frozen assets fluctuate through the years, because Cancer is ruled by the moon and it fluctuates, but that even if it fluctuates out a little bit, it doesn't really go out all the way on the limb. It stays pretty stable. If you go to the 9th house of the horoscope, the 9th house is always the house of your higher education, i.e. college education, writing, how you learn, wonderful teachers that were mentors to you. And it's wonderful. You have the sign of Leo here, which is the sign of life. You get a lot of life energy, and you get really turned on by really good education. And that education's fun for you. Leo is a sign of fun. And Leo is the sign of creative power, and it is the sign of really talking to God. When we talk about, in the Leo myths, we talk about the ability to talk to God directly. There's really an innate ability with Sag risings to really get information all the time from God. It's just a matter of listening. It would suggest that the experience you had with teachers, generally speaking, was they were pretty fun, because Leo is a sign of having fun. It might suggest that teachers you had acted more like fathers to you than maybe your own father or mother, that they felt more like parents to you than actually teachers. It might suggest too that one of your creative, wonderful abilities is writing, and it might be something to explore, or putting together education, like young people's education programs or plans or packages, because Leo is a sign of young people. Moving to the 10th house, which is the house of career and how we handle it and how the outer world sees us, as well as how we saw our father usually. You have the sign of Virgo here, which says you are probably pretty picky at what you do, detailed. You edit a lot. Sometimes you see editors that have Virgo here. Again, Virgo is also associated with healing, so it might be you're in the healing arts of some sort. Virgo is the master craftsperson, so whatever you do, if you love doing it, and that's the key word, you have to love doing it, you do the best that anybody does. If anybody wants somebody who knows what they're doing, they come to you in terms of your field and your industry, and you know how to do it the best. The other side of that might be that even if you are the best, you never think you are, because Virgo on the top of the chart says, I'm not good enough. I don't know if I can be successful. And the reality is you can be. You just have to move past that self-worth issue that's so inherent in this part of the horoscope. It might suggest, if we're looking at this being the area of the life that was your father or the person that looked like a father, that they might have been picky. They might have been critical of you. They also might have been very supportive of your creative ability. All signs have two sides. You might have felt like they were very good at what they did. They served you as a parent. They were there for you, but emotionally it was hard for them to connect with you. And that might be an area that needs to be worked on and off throughout the life. It might suggest that the outer world, when they look at you professionally, they see you as a perfectionist. They see you as someone who can't get perfect enough. And, there's some good news with that, and there's some bad news. There's a certain point you have to let things go. People may see you as a service-oriented type of person, too, because Virgo is the sign of service. And Virgo occupations are writing, editing. We talked about that. Technical analysis. Anything to do with the health field or the healing field, whether it's traditional or non-traditional. Actually, with Virgo here, I would say it's a combining of both fields and both worlds, and probably being able to do it very successfully. Now we move to the 11th house. Now the 11th house shows the friends that we have, the kinds of friends we have, and shows the kinds of goals that we have, and it shows how we are in community. And you have the sign of Libra here, which is extremely social, which says you're very community-oriented, that you would be very social, that your friends would be probably very sophisticated and refined. You might even have a bunch of friends that are lawyers or attorneys or in the legal professions, because Libra is the sign of the scales of justice. You may find yourself having friends that are very loving to you, because Libra is ruled by Venus, who is the goddess of love, who care about you, and who are actually wonderful, wonderful, wonderful resources for you in community for your business and your career. Might suggest, too, since Libra has a way of sort of sitting on the fence and not making up its mind, you may have friends that can't really make up their minds. You may have goals in your own life. You can't make up your mind. Do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? I would say probably with Libra on the house of goals that the goals, in order to meet your needs, not only have to be financially remunerative, but they also have to be very aesthetic, and they have to be very creative, and they have to really have meaning for you, or you probably won't bother to do it. And it may be hard to decide on what your goals are being a Sag rising. Do I want this or do I want this? Can I have this or can I have that? Last house is the 12th house of the horoscope. I always call this the toxic waste management house, not sign, but house. Everything has to pass through here before you're born again in the sign of Sagittarius. A lot of our Fibber-McGee closet garbage is stored in the 12th house, issues we don't want to deal with, that if we deal with them, it'll all come tumbling out like the closet. And it would also suggest this is the blind spot of the chart, the part of ourselves that we don't see, that we need to see to be balanced. And you can put the sign of Scorpio right here, which is the sign of power. Scorpio is a power monger, and it's a power sign. It does suggest, if one believes in past lives, that you were a power-type personality in a past life, and very compulsive and very obsessive, and in this life now you've chosen Sagittarius, which means you're trying to be more optimistic and more carefree and kind of go with the flow. But there's always that shadow hanging around saying, but I'm compulsive underneath. And so you have to really fight that dragon. It's always coming up. It would suggest that there's an intense need for privacy. We talked about that. Psychic ability is probably one of the most powerful, because Scorpio can go down to the depths of the bottom of the earth and the underworld. It has incredible insight. It can walk into a room and just know who to deal with and who not to deal with. It's very psychic, very intuitive, real strong research orientation with the 12th house Scorpio. And in fact, if you want to be in research and development, this would be one of the fields that would be very good for you. And It would also suggest that you work powerfully more behind the scenes than you do in front of the scenes, and that there's a lot of power behind the throne. You can supply a lot of power for people and kind of work your magic where nobody is seeing it. It would also suggest, too, that since the blind spot, Scorpio, it's water, that it's very important to work on trying to get in touch with feelings, emotions, and discuss them rather than holding them in and not discussing them, which just eats up the power and eats you up. Then we start all over again. We start with Sagittarius, the beginning, optimism. So to conclude, we have come full cycle around the wheel, just like at the end of the year when Sagittarius comes. It is the full cycle. And it's important that we have Sagittarius because it is the part of the zodiac, it's the part in all of us that is the part that says that there is something positive after hard work, that there is an ability to prosper, that God is on our side, and to really capsulize it. What is Sagittarius? It's freedom-loving, aspiring, explorative, and bottom line, it is the passion of spirit and vision that is so perfect for the sign of Sagittarius.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you like what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.